Okay, so as we continue, we're looking at the life of Christ, his humanity. I ask you to meet me at Matthew chapter number 12. And as we go to Matthew chapter number 12, we'll look at about verse number 46, and we see this ambivalence about Jesus, even as a family member. Matthew 12:46 says, while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brother stood outside waiting to speak with him. Notice now in the text, and I think Matthew is painting the picture, Mark does it as well, that his family is not always with him. He's teaching and preaching. He's in someone's house, and yet they are on the outside kind of looking in, and they're asking Jesus to come outside. And I just venture to say that they're trying to get Jesus to almost abandon his mission. And at this particular juncture in the ministry of Christ, there's great controversy and conflict with Jesus. There's great ambivalence with Jesus. He's now getting in trouble with the Roman government because of many of the accusations, and certainly he's in trouble with the Pharisees, which are in charge of the synagogue and the temple at this particular time. They dominate, as a matter of fact, in their influence. Proceeds from the temple, from the synagogues, into the actual homes of people. So his family is being scrutinized at this particular time. And then there is great indications through the scriptures that Jesus now is not this popular figure that we know him as. He's now a cosmopolitan kind of commodity. He's widely accepted. We can easily evoke his name. It's not bad being a Christian these days. In fact, it's a virtue to be associated with Jesus the Christ. Not a bad thing. But in this particular day, it was not a good thing to be associated with Jesus. If you look at, is that John chapter number 9? No, I'm sorry, John chapter number 8, I believe it is. All I got to do is turn over there, where there was a blind man that was healed by Jesus. And you see how the Pharisees, and at this particular time the Jews, if you were associated with Jesus in any kind of way, you can be thrown out of the synagogue. And this is probably the equivalent of being disfellowship, being withdrawn from, thrown out of. You have no more membership. You can't come here. You can't worship. We don't want your sacrifice. We don't want your offerings, etc., etc. So it was a bad thing to be associated with Jesus at this particular day, even in the confines of his own family. So when we look at, again, Matthew chapter number 12, while Jesus was speaking, and Jesus, of course, made the speech, he said, who is my mother, my brother? Who is my family? And he looked around in the room and pointed at those in the room and says, they that do the will of my Father, the same, is my family. In other words, tell them to go on back home. They're not in here with me now. And this is my true family, those that do the will of God. Mark adds a little bit more clarity to this, a little bit more color. In Mark chapter number 3 and verse number 21, when Mark says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him. Go down there and get Jesus and bring Jesus back home. Tell him to stop showing out. For they said he is out of his mind. This is a really, really good indication that here's our brother. And in Mary's case, and she kept these things pondered in her heart, she kind of know what the deal is. But others who are part of the family are not, altogether readily accepting of Jesus Christ being God. His language and his speech is kind of like Joseph. Won't you just hold that down? Won't you keep that on the down low while you have to tell people what your dream is? And so with this comes the scrutiny and ridicule of his own family. And they say he is out of his mind. And this came from the camp of his own family, not the outsiders, not the folks in the community who certainly have these ruminations about Jesus. But this is his own family that thought there was something a little batty about Jesus. Read Mark chapter number 3 and verse number 21. And so this gives rise to us understanding the true context and the person of Jesus Christ, who he was, in fact, at this particular day, and the uphill climb of him being a common person in a common society, but having an uncommon purpose. Um, John chapter number 7 and verse number 5 gives a further indication of this ambivalence as well. But John chapter number 7 verse number 5 says, "For neither did his brethren believe him." So there was trepidation, there was disbelief, there was this feeling that he can't be God, he can't be the Messiah, and just let me have a little attitude. He sleeps at the foot of the bed with us. He eats breakfast with us. He follows us when we follow Daddy, to do certain jobs. I don't know about the education system per se as it relates to Jesus. I know that his knowledge, his wisdom, is a divine knowledge and wisdom. He has wisdom and never knew letters, never studied in that day. But even his own brothers did not believe in him. So says John chapter number 7 and verse number 5. But we do see as he grows older now, when they take this trip to Jerusalem as a part of the rites of passage, he is with his cousin John, and Elizabeth is present. Zechariah is present, because this was a trek that they had to make by a Jewish custom. So at this time, Jesus is 12 years old. They lose Jesus. This is Luke chapter number 2. They kind of lose Jesus along the way, and here's the reasoning for that. At the age of 12, you had a dual status. You were considered a child because you were a child, but also because of the rites of passage, the completion of that thing. You were also considered to be a young man, like a grown man. And the method of travel in that day was that women and children would be up front, and the men would bring up the rear. That's the typical way of traveling. So Jesus has the option of traveling with children, maybe John the Baptist, his cousins, and some other people from the neighborhood. And he also had the option of traveling with his father, Zacharias, and some of the other men from the cities and villages round about. And so they're taken for granted as they make this trek that maybe Joseph, the older men from the village, are saying, yeah, all the kids are up there. Jesus is up front with the women. And then the women up front, Mary included, she's saying, okay, Jesus decided to walk with his dad in the back. He is a young man now. But neither of them really with certainty know where Jesus is. So Jesus was left behind in Jerusalem. He's in the temple talking with the elders, asking questions and answering questions simultaneously. Now, while Christ is giving a divine wisdom and knowledge, at this particular time, culturally and by Jewish custom, it would have been important for him to learn Scripture. It would have been important for him to frequent the synagogue, the temple, to read, to get an understanding. It was important for Joseph to teach him the Decalogue and all aspects of the law and culture, even those things that would be found in the Talmud, this oral tradition. It would have been important for him to learn those things. So I'm going to venture to say that as a child and as a lad, as a young man, adolescent, some of the stuff that Jesus he knows because he was being taught that. And I don't know that he evoked his divinity early on in terms of his knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. He's sharp, all right, but I think it might be a combination of his divine wisdom, knowledge, and understanding coupled with those things that he was being taught in his own household. And it was incumbent upon his family to teach him those things as well. So when we look at Luke chapter number 4 and verse number 16, Bible says he went into Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. This is a pattern. This is a habit of Jesus. And he stood up to read. And of course, you know that this is the day that he kind of stepped and launched into his purpose by reading. That would have been Isaiah 61, Isaiah 61, where it talked about the purpose that he came to serve, to open the eyes of the blind, to free the captives, etc., etc. So you see Jesus early on, as a lad, as a young man, as a common person. He goes to church. He goes to the synagogue at that day, and the Bible says he was brought up in Nazareth. So with a small village, and it's kind of like our small towns where we live, you will kind of be acquainted with family, with the various families in the neighborhood. There's Joseph. They live down there. It's not this Joseph's son. Don't they live down the street? And ain't this one of their boys, their oldest boy? And so they had this quaint society where you would know members of the family, and they knew Jesus. And in order for him to be even selected to read, and of course this is divine providence that he read on this particular day in Luke chapter number 4. But the managers of the temple, the teachers of the temple in that particular day, they would have known their students. They would have been very much associated with their mothers and their fathers, and this was just standard protocol. And when they gave him the scroll to read, Jesus did not select it. They gave it to Jesus. They knew by habit, by practice, by pattern, that Jesus could in fact stand up in front of folk and read from the scroll, and he was versed as well. And so this is an early indication of who Jesus was, and what we're trying to do is really add some historicity. We're trying to add some commonality to Jesus. We're trying to look at him in the scope of being a human being, a person that's a part of a family, having a mother, a real mother that nurtured him, that raised him, walking down to the market to run an errand, playing with the kids in the neighborhood. Although we don't have a whole lot of color on that, we're making pretty much a pretty good assumption here that he had a typical childhood growing up. And early on he had to go to Egypt to avoid some problems with Herod desiring to kill him at the early age of 2. But by the time he returns, he's able to live somewhat a common life among his own people in the city of Nazareth. And so for lesson number 2, who was he? Who was Jesus? And again, to try to make this separation, this distinction between Jesus and the Christ, we gain a greater appreciation to Jesus Christ, and not just him as a human, as Mary's baby, so to speak, but also as a young man having this very special purpose, having this divine purpose that comes from God, who is God, but yet fits into the narrow confines of humanity, and that whole struggle with not being believed by your own brethren, and even the mother, and maybe even Joseph, having to pull back just a little bit. They know that this is a divine child, but they have to play it off, so to speak. They have to play a role. And so this helps us to appreciate who he was. And so in our next lesson, we're going to take a look at what was he. Then we're going to cross that bridge and go over to the side of the divine, and we'll kind of take a look and tie in some of these divine nuances of who Jesus was in that common society as a common person, but yet having this divine purpose. And so we'll see you at the discussion board, because we want to look at John as was given your previous assignment. We're going to take a look at John, and we wanted you to do a survey of John and look at all of the indication that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is God, and he's a man at the same time. So we'll take a look at that on the discussion board. Till the next time, we bid you Godspeed.